Today, we're going to be comparing religious discrimination to gender and race discrimination in the tech industry. I know, right? This is going to be fun. Before we dive into this too in depth, I want to lay some ground rules. I want to set the stage here. This is not to knock on anyone, nor is this to poo-poo on any group that's out there. Diversity is good. Let's just lay that out there. Things being diverse is a good thing. This is just looking at numbers. What we're going to do here is we're going to be comparing raw numbers as best as we can find them and seeing what, if anything, any of it means. Which means, if you feel compelled to yell at me as we go through this, I understand that this can be a very charged, very emotional issue. I totally get that, totally respect that. If you get upset at something I say, take a deep breath. Realize that we're just talking about numbers here, not solutions, not what should or shouldn't happen, just raw numbers. And try to get to the end of the video before you yell at me, because my guess is by the time you reach the end, you probably won't want to yell at me. And if you still do, I don't know what's going on. This particular video is brought to you by Lulzbot. They make some of the most amazing 3D printers on the planet. But the really important thing I want to talk to you about today is that Lulzbot is having a GPL benefit sale, which I think is just the most awesome idea for a sale ever. So if you go to lulzbot.com/GPL-sale, they have their full line of printers. You can buy them refurbished, which means, you know, they're cheaper. They're taking an additional 15% off of those, that price on top of it. And every printer you buy, they donate $50 to the Free Software Foundation. They're doing this through May 14th. I've got it on the screen in front of me and I couldn't even remember it. They're doing it through May 14th. I can't recommend it enough. Plus, if you love free software, now is just a really good time, because then you get to feel like, hey, I'm also helping out the Free Software Foundation while getting an awesome 3D printer from a company who supports free software. You can't really go wrong. All right. So I was watching an episode of HBO Silicon Valley recently. In the current season, they have a plot line. It's kind of a side plot line that really goes over about 2 episodes where, and I won't give anything big away here, that touches on religious discrimination within not just Silicon Valley, but within the general tech industry. And the whole plot kind of resonated with me. I saw some things that looked very familiar to me, both things that I've experienced and I've seen other people experience as well across the industry. And that got me wondering, how does religious discrimination compare to discrimination against, say, other groups within specifically computing and technology? I really didn't know. I wanted to dig into this a little deeper and find out. And as I started digging into it, I quickly realized that it was going to be darn near impossible to quantify any sort of real numbers outside of employment statistics. So we're going to just narrow in and focus on that. Now, there's a lot more that goes into discrimination than just, you know, what percentage of classifications of people are employed in various industries, right? But that is one aspect of this. You could call it diversity quotas. You could call it discrimination issues. Whatever words you want to use for it is really okay by me. But what we're looking at is different classifications of people. How well represented are they within the tech industry? Again, there are other things we could look at here, is from, you know, discrimination cases and all sorts of things, but stats on that are astoundingly hard to come by. So we're going to focus on what we can measure here, and that is employment statistics. And let's start by getting kind of a baseline here. Let's look at women in technology. And so that's been one that we've been talking about a lot. There are many organizations that focus on outreach towards women to get more women into technology roles, whether it's software development and testing, program management, or just any sort of role within high-tech companies. According to the National Center for Women in Information Technology, it sits around 26% of the computing occupations in the U.S. workforce are held by women, about 26%. Breaking that down a little bit further, I pulled some numbers from Statista.com that shows, at least somewhat recently, what the percentage of the workforce at some of the biggest tech companies are that are women. Microsoft has a 26% of their workforce being women, and then it goes all the way up to Netflix, which is at 43%. And then all the other companies, Apple, Google, Amazon, all of them are kind of in the middle there, right? Between 26 and 43%. Now, that's fair. So 26 to 43%. However, the population of the United States is 50.8% female. So it's fair to say that even at Netflix, which has some of the highest percentages of women in their workforce at 43%, that is significantly less than 50.8%, right? So it's fair to say that women are underrepresented within the technology industry as compared to how many women are within the global population, right? It's not so important that there are more women than any other classification or that there's equal numbers of women and men. But in my mind, I look at it from a very mathematical point of view. If things are equal, right? If things are truly diverse within a company, then that company would, in theory, have a workforce population demographic that roughly matches that of the place that they live. So at 50.8%, and for women in the global population, clearly even Netflix at 43% doesn't quite hit that. So how does that compare, though, to people who are religious? Well, I couldn't find any stats on this anywhere. I could find people talking about this. I could find people talking anecdotally about how it seems like they're the only religious person within a large, bullpen of developers, et cetera, et cetera. But I couldn't find any details. So I ran a poll. I ran a poll on Twitter. And the reason I did it on Twitter is because if I do a poll on Twitter, each individual person can only vote once, which makes it hard to game the system. Whereas if I put up a purely anonymous poll somewhere, it's much easier to game those. Plus, I'm very, very lazy. So I did a poll over on Twitter. And this is not overly scientific. We had a sample size of over about 500 people, and that's good enough to get us started here. I would like to do more diving into this. But anyway, the poll. Simple question for people, for just those who work in the computer industry. Would you consider yourself, pick the strongest match: religious, atheist, spiritual, or other? Twitter polls can only have 4 options. I don't even know if these are necessarily the best options, but this gets us a good start, right? This gets us going and trying to figure out a demographic makeup here. And what I found really interesting was 21% of the people that responded that they were religious, and 60% responded that they were outright atheist, right? Now, this is of my typical audience. I am a religious man. I just am, which would suggest, and being as I've talked about that a few times in the past, my guess would be that the representation of religious technology field people would be slightly higher for my channel, my Twitter accounts, etc., than perhaps for other technology related YouTube channels, podcasts, Twitter accounts, etc. I don't know if that really bears out, but anyway, that's just a guess I could make on that part. But 21% say that they're religious. That is a very small number, an incredibly small number. In fact, if you compare that against the global population, and when I say global, I mean in the United States, right? Because we're really focusing on the United States here. We can branch this out worldwide, and that becomes a very interesting discussion, but I'm laser focused on these numbers within the USA right here. Just the Christian population of the United States alone, 70.6% of the population identifies as religiously Christian. Non-Christian faiths make up 5.9% of the remainder of the population, and then atheists make up 3.1%, which, I mean, those are pretty interesting numbers when you compare them. So the populace of the USA that identifies as religious is 76.5%, according to the Pew poll. 21% is less than 76.5% by a lot. Now, really, how does that stack up, right? So I put together this little graph here. For those of you listening to the podcast version, I'll try and explain this as I go, but this is there's a lot of graphs in this episode, so you might want to check out the video. So tech employees that are female versus the population that are female. Clearly, the women in tech are underrepresented as compared to their percentage of the USA population. That's clear and obvious, right? But the difference there between the population that is religious and the tech employees that are religious is an even bigger margin. Now, check this out. So change this up a little bit. And what I did is I called it percentage of possible, but that's not really a great phrase for it. I just had a hard time coming up with squishing enough words into a small enough area. What we're really looking at here is what is the percentage of 100% of what a thing would be in the populace. So for instance, I have here religious percentage of possible, and it comes just over 30%. And what that basically says is they're 30% of the way to having parity of the rest of the United States populace, right? Of what the total number of religious people are within the United States. So this really tells us how far below we are of simply meeting what the average demographics are within a given area. Whereas women are just a hair over 50% of what they would need to be the same within the tech companies as they are within the global populace. So that means that technically, people who identify as religious are less likely to get technology jobs or work in technology than women are by a significant margin, 35% compared to over 50% for women. Now, if we included the spiritual results that I got from that Twitter poll into the religious total, that number rises to about 33%, putting that category more on par with women in technology, though still less when compared to the total population, because again, over 70% of the total population is religious, which means that they are extraordinarily not represented in the technology field. So I had a follow-up with that to kind of see if people had seen discrimination happen. And so I asked quite simply, have you ever experienced or witnessed people being discriminated against in any way because of their religion? 37% said yes, 63% said no. Now, 37% saying yes feels high to me, considering only 21% of people that in the poll actually identified as being religious. So that tells me that the amount of discrimination going on is actually really high. Now, this is very unscientific, but I think these results suggest that further research might be necessary here. Now, this got me thinking. Let's take a little bit of a side tack here for a second. Let's talk about political affiliation. I know, I'm just trying to hit as many buttons and make people mad as possible, it seems like today, but I think this is really interesting. Everyone, again, deep breath, deep breath. Let's look at political affiliation within the tech industry, because there's just no stats on this out there. If you consider, I asked this poll, if you consider yourself a computer nerd, which political description would best describe you? And I made it clear, I know there's not a lot of options because Twitter only allows 4 polling choices, but pick the closest match. 32% left, 34% center, 18% right, and 16% other. Now, interestingly, a lot of the people that responded other made a note to me, either sent me a direct message or replied to it and said, you know, I would put myself more like that other included a lot of people that viewed themselves as anarchist, some people that viewed themselves as more libertarian, but they didn't feel comfortable calling themselves right. So it was really all over the map there. But clearly, center and left had the strongest showing there, which really makes sense based on, I think, what I've seen, at least within the industry. And here's that graphed out. You can see center is absolutely dominant, and with left not too far behind. it would be interesting to do a much better study on this. Honestly, the poll I did was very quick and dirty just because I was interested, and it's just not comprehensive enough. The sample size isn't large enough. I don't feel like I was able to put it out enough questions to really discern anything really meaty and valuable from it. So I feel like more study could use to be done on this. However, there's very good reason to not do more studies on this, because I think a lot of people are very uncomfortable talking about their political affiliation relating to their work for fear of reprisals, which prompted me to do this follow-up poll. And again, this is another very sloppy poll. We need more data on this in order to make full sense of it, but it's interesting nonetheless. So what I asked was this: do you keep your political leanings secret or private at work, on social media, whatever, for fear of it causing problems with your employment, or to avoid possible discrimination? So I gave them 4 options because that's all that Twitter lets me do. The first one was yes. Yes, I keep it private. I'm a conservative. Second, yes, I keep it private. I'm a liberal. Third is yes. Other, I'm an other. And 44%, no, I don't keep anything private. I talk about it publicly. No was by far and away the winner here. 44% of respondents were like, no, I don't keep it private at all. However, what was interesting to me was 18% of people responded, yes, I keep it secret. I'm a conservative. 15% of people who identified as liberal keep it secret and conservative, and 23% who don't fall into either of those baskets keep it secret. Now, if you compare, and again, this really gets fuzzy in my opinion. I don't feel terribly confident in these numbers, but they do suggest something that's worth additional study. If you compare them, that means the 2 polls together, how many people identified, what percentage of people identified as conservative versus what percentage identified as conservatives who don't talk about it for fear of it having an impact on their job, it nears 100%. Almost 100%, according to these polls, of conservatives keep it quiet because they're afraid it'll hurt their job if people at their jobs find out they're a conservative. Now, there was a large percentage of liberals that kept it secret too. It was over 40% of liberals kept it secret for the same reasons, but conservatives at near 100%. And honestly, I kind of noticed that within most companies that I've worked in and worked around, especially over the last couple of years. It's really trended that way, where people who are conservative do keep things secret because they're afraid it will have a very negative impact on their job. Again, these polls are limited. Based on my audience and the options available on Twitter and the polling system, the suggestions are very interesting to me, and I feel like they could use to be studied much more in depth. But let's move on from the politics side of things, because I don't feel like we can draw really definitive conclusions from that because the numbers just aren't hard enough. So let's move back over to comparing the employment statistics of religious people versus a number of other groups, and some of these are chosen arbitrarily, and some of them are simply chosen because they're what the most data is available on, I guess, other groups within the United States. So let's start with the global population. Sorry, the United States population. I keep saying global. I guess I mean the public populace, right? So of the United States populace, was it 76% that identifies as religious, right? So that's the largest group, the largest single demographic that we're looking at here. Women came in at 50.8%. Now, the white U.S. population is by far the largest ethnicity population, right? Slightly less than that of what makes up the religious population. I believe it's 70-something%. Then I also have African American, Hispanic, and Asian here as well, because it's interesting to look at these numbers when we start to look at tech. So bear these numbers in mind. Keep that, sear that chart into your head. Now let's compare at tech employment population statistics for the exact same groups. When you look at, now things changed quickly. If you move back and forth between the two, one thing you notice right away is that the number of people who are white, who identify as white, who would write Caucasian or white on a form, is large. It's the longest bar by far when you look at the percentage of people working in technology, right? but it's also a very, very large percentage of the population. Immediately, you notice that the number of people, the percentage of people that are religious, drops way down. It goes from being the longest bar to being the third longest bar, and that's way down there. The same happens with women. The women was the third longest bar there for the rest of the population, and then once we get into the tech sector, all of a sudden the women drop down to, what is that, 26%, I believe. Now, where things, in my opinion, get really fascinating, and you can see the numbers for African American, Hispanic, and Asian are all around 10% or less of the tech workers, and this is within the United States. Now let's compare those two, because in my opinion, and I'm leaving my opinion out of this for the most part, but what I think is statistically interesting, and this is where my opinion comes in, is how do those numbers two numbers compare together, right? So, for instance, if we're looking at 68% of tech workers in the United States are white, how does that compare to the rest of the population? Is that a bigger percentage or a lower percentage? Well, here's those numbers compared, and this chart is fascinating to me. The first thing you're going to notice right off the bat is there at the bottom part of the bar, people who identify as Asian in technology jumps to nearly 300% of the representation that they would have in the mass populace. That's right. Look at this. Look at this. They may make up a relatively small percentage of the total tech workforce, coming in at just over 10%. However, they are significantly higher, significantly more represented, but to the tune of almost threefold than any other demographic that I was able to find within the tech industry. Which means if you're really looking at it from a diversity standpoint, Asians in technology are overrepresented by threefold. Interestingly to me, and I did not realize this, people who are white, identifiably white within the tech industry are actually underrepresented compared to the rest of the populace. They hit, was it roughly, according to this chart, I think it's like 89%, something like that. I have the chart here. They don't hit that 100% line. Now, they're better represented than women in technology, African American, Hispanic in technology, for sure. Without a doubt, they're better represented. However, they are underrepresented. And here is the real truth of the matter. This is not a knock on any group, no group whatsoever. This is just math. The reason that whites and everyone else are underrepresented in technology is because Asians are overrepresented in technology. That is literally the reason. It just doesn't, it's surprising to me. I had no idea. Now, whites in technology don't make up, they don't even hit that 100%. They don't hit parity percentage wise with the rest of the population. However, religious people in technology were the least represented as compared to what they are represented within the rest of the community. Way underrepresented, less than Hispanics, African Americans, or women in technology. People who identify as religious in technology are way down there. I mean, that bar is tiny. Again, if you look at it based on the hiring pool, theoretically, they have the smallest chart. They have the smallest graph. Which means that the most, if you take employment statistics as a representation of either diversity or discrimination, the most underrepresented and discriminated against group then in the technology industry, as far as I can tell, are people that identify as religious. And that's just math, right? That's just simply the truth. But if that's true, if these numbers bear out, right, if we did more studies around this and did some additional polling and really got some more hard numbers and it bared out even close, because I mean, the margin of error here for religious people in tech is big. I mean, we're talking like a 20 percentage point swing here. Like my numbers in my poll would have to be just astronomically wrong for this number to change at all. But why is this mostly being ignored? realistically, when was the last time you heard about anyone making a big deal? Any company saying, you know what, we're just people who are identifiably religious, whether it's Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, anything. Why are they underrepresented? We need to do a diversity push for these sorts of people. Why is that not happening? Now imagine this, just clear your head. What if tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Apple, everyone else had religious in tech events where they try and recruit specifically religious people to come work at their company and ignored women in technology? What if instead, what if there was no, let's have outreach programs towards women in technology. Let's get rid of all those and just have outreach programs towards religious people in technology. Well, I think people would get pretty mad. And honestly, I think people should get pretty mad if that happened. I really do. But at the same token, I think people should get pretty mad that there aren't things like that around religious people in technology. Or you could get mad because those sort of outreach programs exist at all. That starts to get into a whole nother set of gray areas where I don't think I want to get into right now. But realistically, you don't see any outreach happening towards what appears to be the most discriminated against group in technology. Now, you'll note as I went through this, I never said anything disparaging against any group. No, not a bit, because I have nothing disparaging to say against any group. If people get mad at me about this for saying that I'm anti anything, because technically I did say that based on those numbers, the most discriminated against group, or at least the least represented group, is those that are religious within the technology industry, which does mean inherently that all other groups, whites, African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, women, everybody are other than just male are underrepresented, right? And should I guess technically male too. What was I talking about? I don't remember. but you notice I didn't say anything bad against anyone, right? Everyone's good. There's no badness here. We shouldn't be yelling at each other. We should adhere to the Bill and Ted credo of be excellent to each other. But in order to be excellent to each other, we need to be honest with each other. We need to take a real, honest, intellectual, engineering-focused look at what our industry is doing. And this is kind of fascinating to me. I think this should be a discussion. I think this should be something that we discuss. Should anything be done about this? I honestly don't know. I honestly don't. I really, really don't know. I've been a hiring manager in technology companies for a long, long time. And I've never had quotas to meet. Right? I always hired the best people for the job, and that was always just the way I went because I wanted great people. It didn't matter what gender or ethnicity they were. None of that mattered. We never came up what religion they may or may not be. It just didn't matter, right? But should there be something? Should there be programs in place to encourage more religious people in the workforce in the technology world? Maybe. I don't know. There are for pretty much all other minorities. So why not religious people? Who are clearly a minority within the technology industry. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what the answer here is. And despite how neutral I have been on this, and I'm feeling pretty neutral because I just don't really know what to do about any of this. I simply find it fascinating that we're not talking about it very much when it is such a clear and obvious issue. And thank you to Silicon Valley writers for bringing it up and making it a little bit more front and center. But despite how neutral I've been, am I still going to get yelled at? I think I am. In fact, I think I'm going to get yelled at quite a lot. But I still think it's important to talk about. I think this is an important topic. Again, the polls I did were very unscientific, but they help to suggest what the numbers might be. More study could be done in order to ascertain better details here. However, as far as I can tell, these little polls I put up are the best source of details around these statistics that I've been able to find online. Feel free to encourage other people who do these sorts of anonymous polling to start including these demographics, religious, non-religious, political affiliation, etc., within their polls, so we can get a better feel from a broader sample set of what the technology industry is. My guess is, based on my gut feeling, based on the impressions that other people have expressed to me as well, that those numbers that I came up with from the poll, where it's about 21% of the industry identifies as religious, is probably about right. But maybe it's not. So we need to look into that a little bit further. I debated putting this video together many times because it's inevitably going to cause people to yell at people, and I hope that people don't. Again, this needs to not be an us versus them thing. We're all cool humans. We should all try and do the best for not only ourselves, but for each other and the organizations that we're within. And discriminating against one group but making a big point about helping other groups who are discriminated against less, that doesn't seem like a good thing to me. So I think we need to talk about this a little bit more. And this episode of The Lunduke Show was brought to you in part, though they didn't have any idea what I was about to talk about today. They don't know. I'm a loose cannon. Was brought to you in part by Purism, who make amazing laptops with hardware kill switches for webcams. Like if you got a webcam on there, you put a little cover over it to, you know, protect your privacy from NSA and other nefarious organizations who want to get access to your webcam and see what you're doing. Well, webcam covers, that's cute and all, but that doesn't help out the microphone, and it feels like a little bit of a half fix. Kill switches is what you need. Purism provides kill switches in their laptops. Physical kill switch, not a software thing. A little switch, tick, toggle it, severed the connection to your webcam entirely. How do you? That's how you do it, man. You can find out more over at Purism's website, puri.sm, and Pogo Linux, who make some of the most amazing servers on the planet. Go to pogolinux.com, look through their servers, and begin to drool at what is possible in the world of computers nowadays. I mean, we're talking, you know, petabytes of storage, software-defined storage, huge compute clusters, ARM servers, AMD servers, Intel servers. It's awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And they'll put on a wide variety of pre-tested Linux distributions at your wish. I think they'll do Windows as well, but they specialize on the Linux side of things. So go check out pogolinux.com. And of course, you can go over to lunduke.com and click on the Lunduke store and pick up one of my Stallman was right shirts. It's a little ASCII art of cow saying Stallman was right. I love that shirt. I'm going to be wearing this shirt to a couple of upcoming events because it's my current favorite shirt. Or you can go to linuxtycoon.com if you want to pick up a copy of my GPL licensed video game where you can sit in a terminal or on an old DOS machine or on an old Commodore 64 or on a modern Linux desktop or Windows or Mac desktop and simulate building and running and marketing your own Linux distribution, which is both simultaneously the most boring thing I can think of for a video game and the most awesome. It's weird how that works. And a big thanks to all my Patreon supporters who help make this possible, all 600 some odd of you that continue to keep the lights on here at Lunduke Studios and allow me to make videos that, even though I don't want them to make everyone angry, probably are going to make people angry. And if you need to get a hold of me, you can email me at brian@lunduke.com, or you can go to patreon.com/brianlunduke and message me there as well. Or if you want to support me, that's the place to go. You can also go over to my BBS. You can telnet into bbs.lunduke.com. If you got questions, Linuxy questions, free software and open sourcey questions, you can get them in our Thursday show, which is beautifully titled Linux Thursday. Send me an email with the subject line Linux Thursday, all one word. Don't put a space between Linux and Thursday. I have a filter set up and I don't want to adjust my filter. So you can get your question in the show that way. Big thanks to everyone for hanging out. Big thanks to all the sponsors. And please, seriously, I hope don't yell at me too much. I can't take it. I'm a fragile man.